The prince was about to marry another, until he saw the face of the woman who washed his clothes. The bells rang early that morning, low and deliberate, reverberating through the limestone corridors like the murmur of a coming storm. Within the servants' wing of Aurenza Palace, the clatter of morning began with a rush of skirts, the soft rustle of aprons being tied, and the scent of boiled lavender oil meant to please the noblewomen. Anya Volkova was already at work before the light touched the upper floors. She moved soundlessly through the dressing chamber of Baroness von Elstein, smoothing a silver-threaded gown over the chaise, pinning back loose curls from the lady's ivory wig stand, her movements precise, fluid. She didn't speak. She never did. Her silence had long ago ceased to be a curiosity and settled into something quietly accepted, like a faded tapestry no longer admired, but still in place. Born into a world above these corridors, gilded, ordered, unreal, Anya had once been the daughter of a nobleman. Her father, Count Volkova, had worn his honor too plainly and made enemies too easily. After a whispered scandal at court, he had been stripped of land and name in the span of a single winter, his family scattered. Anya had been 13. Now 20, she carried herself with the quiet knowledge of everything lost. She did not complain, nor did she cry. When others muttered about the chill in the dressing halls or the heaviness of their charges' brocade skirts, Anya remained silent, her eyes lowered. She communicated through notes when needed, neatly folded slips of parchment in narrow script, or simple gestures. The other maids neither bullied nor befriended her. There was something about her that made people unsure whether to offer kindness or keep distance. Perhaps it was the way she looked at people, as if she saw things she had no business knowing. The day unraveled swiftly, like a seam torn by careless hands. It was Baroness von Elstein who first shouted, her voice high and indignant as it echoed from the east dressing rooms. Within moments, half the household staff had been summoned, and Anya stood with her hands clasped before her, surrounded by the accusing eyes of the upper servants. The Baroness stood over her lacquered dressing table, the ornate box of her personal effects flung open. A jeweled hairpiece, Hungarian garnets, intricately mounted, was missing. The chief of servants, Herr Brecht, strode into the room with the weight of authority stitched into every fold of his coat. His eyes flicked over the staff, lingering only a breath longer on Anya. None shall leave until the item is found. Panic whispered through the maids like wind in tall grass. One swore she'd seen the Baroness's maid tuck something into her apron pocket, but the accusation was silenced before it took root. No one wanted to risk naming the wrong person. No one wanted to risk being next. Anya stood straight-backed. She didn't glance left or right. She only listened, her breath slow, steady, measured. Her own apron was spotless, her pockets empty. When Herr Brecht approached, asking questions, she shook her head calmly and wrote nothing. There was nothing to write. She had done nothing wrong. But when no evidence appeared and no confession surfaced, eyes turned back to her. She was the last one in the room, someone said. She's quiet, too quiet. She's of no family now, nothing to lose. It was enough. Herr Brecht's verdict fell with the finality of an execution. Dismissed from her post as lady's maid, effective immediately. Reassigned to the laundry quarters. Before the household staff, in the shadow of polished mirrors and hand-carved dressing screens, Anya bowed her head. She did not argue. She did not beg. Her expression remained composed, though her fingers had turned to ice. The court, of course, would never question such a reassignment. A silent maid of noble blood. An inconvenience. One step closer to the laundry was no tragedy in their eyes. Just the final descent of a girl already forgotten. She was escorted back to her small room at the far end of the servants' wing by one of the junior footmen. He didn't speak to her as she packed her meager belongings, 2 shifts, a worn book of parables, and a handkerchief with faded embroidery. She folded them carefully, placed them into a linen bundle, and left without a backward glance. The descent into the lower levels of the palace was literal. The marble gave way to limestone, and then to rougher, darker stone. The corridors narrowed. Lamps burned oil instead of beeswax. The scent of rose water and starch was replaced by damp wool and scorched lye. As the door to the laundry quarters opened, a wave of heat and steam rolled outward, licking at her face with open-mouthed breath. A woman with iron-gray hair and thick forearms glanced up from a vat of boiling water. "This the new one?" she asked without interest. The footman nodded and left without a word. The door clanged shut behind him. "Name?" the woman asked. Anya reached for her writing slip, but the woman waved it away. "Don't care. You'll learn fast, or you'll burn. This is no place for finery." The days blurred together. They began before dawn and ended when the last sheet was dried and folded. Her hands, once soft, blistered and cracked. The steam never lifted. The walls wept moisture. Her back ached and her fingers bled. Yet she said nothing. In that hot, punishing place, Anya learned to survive all over again. She didn't see the court again, not the upper halls, not the light-soaked corridors where she had once moved like a shadow. Now her world was lined with drying racks and iron hooks, her silence matched only by the hiss of boiling vats. The nights were worse. In the sleeping quarters, shared by 6 women and a narrow-bellied stove, she lay on her cot with her bundle clutched to her chest. Even sleep refused to comfort her. 3 days passed. On the 4th, the storm came. The air had been heavy since morning. By nightfall, thunder rolled low across the mountains, and the sky cracked open. Rain sheeted down the narrow windows of the servants' wing, drumming against the stone with relentless rhythm. The gutters overflowed. Light flickered. Somewhere above, a shutter had come loose and clapped open in the wind. Anya stood just outside the entrance to the laundry quarters, her bundle clutched tightly to her chest. Her shift clung to her skin, soaked through. Rain traced lines down her cheeks like silent tears. Her slippers were soaked, the leather darkened and soft with water. She could hear the groan of pipes and the hiss of steam inside. The glow of the hearth spilled faintly from beneath the door. Her heart pounded, not from fear, but from the knowledge that she was about to step across the final threshold. This was her life now. No voice, no name, no place but this. She took a step forward, then stopped. Above her, across the courtyard and behind the arching windows of the gallery, a silhouette moved. He stood still, half hidden by shadow, outlined by a flash of lightning. Tall, unmoving, watching. His face was obscured, but she felt his gaze, steady and unflinching, the way one might watch a falling star. Not with pity, with curiosity, with consequence. The air trembled around her. Another flash of lightning lit the stone for a breathless second. And in the next instant, as thunder cracked like a whip through the courtyard, the heavy iron door behind her swung open, and Anya was pushed inside by the matron of the laundry, unaware that the prince himself had just seen her fall from grace. The days bled into one another, marked only by the turning of the laundry wheels and the hiss of boiling water. Below the palace floors, where sunlight never reached and the walls perpetually wept with moisture, Anya learned the rhythm of her new world. It was a life of calloused hands and sore knees, of blistering steam and the copper sting of soap lie on raw skin. At first, no one spoke to her. They measured her by her silence, by her lack of complaint, by her pale fingers trembling beneath the weight of water-soaked sheets. She rose before dawn with the others, pulled on her damp apron, and stepped into the steam-choked chamber. The noise was constant, the creak of wooden racks, the slosh of basins, the scrape of iron against cloth. The air was thick enough to swallow a voice, but Anya made no attempt to speak. She moved as she always had, quietly, precisely, without waste. She folded each petticoat with reverence, scrubbed collars until her wrists ached, and sorted the delicate lace from the court gowns without tearing a single thread. It was this, more than anything, that earned Goethe's attention. The older woman was a presence in the room, broad-shouldered, sharp-eyed, with forearms strong enough to wring out a blanket in one twist. She watched Anya from beneath her grey brows, her mouth pursed in suspicion. But Anya never asked for less work, never made a sound, never sought sympathy. When the younger girls slacked or muttered about blisters, Anya only kept working. By the end of the week, Goethe tossed her a larger basin and said, "If you're not weak, prove it." Anya took it without hesitation. That was the first sign of approval. Goethe said nothing more, but from then on, she made sure Anya was assigned to the finer fabrics, the ones destined for noble shoulders. Silk chemises, lace-hemmed bodices, and velvet underrobes soaked with perfume and sweat. It was an exhausting privilege. One afternoon, after hours of scrubbing, starching, and folding, Anya was handed a delivery crate and ordered to bring it to the royal dressing chambers. She wiped her hands dry on her apron, smoothed her damp skirts, and stepped into the service stairwell, heart pounding beneath her bodice. The stairs wound tightly, dimly lit by wall-mounted lamps, the heat rising in waves. She emerged into the upper corridors like a shadow slipping through silk. Her shoes made no sound on the tiled floor. The crate weighed heavy in her arms, its pressed garments wrapped in linen cloth. She kept her gaze low, always, careful to move quickly and avoid notice. She turned the final corner and halted. Ahead of her, a pair of footmen stood outside the royal dressing chamber, flanking the entrance like statues. The corridor was wider here, polished, brighter, and filled with voices. Just as she prepared to bow and pass, the door opened. Prince Victor stepped out. She stopped, mid-breath. He was taller than she remembered. No, not remembered, imagined. She had only seen him from a distance in passing moments when she was still a lady's maid. But now he was close enough for her to see the creases near his eyes, the way his coat caught the light, the slight tension in his jaw as he spoke to the gentleman at his side. Then his eyes met hers. He didn't look away. It lasted no more than a second, perhaps two. But in that space, something passed between them. Not familiarity, not recognition, something else. His conversation faltered. The man beside him paused, glancing between them. Victor's gaze narrowed slightly, his brow creasing not in suspicion but in thought, as though he were trying to place her. She bowed quickly, lower than needed, and clutched the crate tighter to her chest. He said nothing, and she walked past. By the time she returned to the laundry, her heart had steadied. She didn't allow herself to dwell on it. Princes did not linger in thought over laundresses. She resumed her duties, her fingers red and sore, her breath visible in the ever-present steam. That night, in his private study, Victor leaned against the carved mantelpiece and stared at the embers. His valet moved about the chamber in silence until Victor asked, offhandedly, "The girl in the corridor today, who was she?" "Which girl, Your Highness?" "The one with the laundry crate, pale skin, quiet. I don't recall seeing her before." The valet paused. "Ah, one of the new laundresses, I believe. Mute, I'm told. Volkova, I think her name was." Victor turned his head slowly. "Volkova?" "Yes, Your Highness. She used to serve as a maid upstairs, but there was an incident." The valet hesitated. "I don't know the details. She was reassigned to the laundry not long ago." Victor didn't reply. He only nodded once, then dismissed him. The next morning, Anya worked alone at the finishing table, her hands moving over a duchess's silk underdress. It was lavender, expensive, imported, likely meant for the Duchess Irina herself. The hem had torn slightly, no doubt from a heel or careless step. Anya was smoothing the damage when her fingers found something odd in the seam. A stitch, too tight, a line that didn't match the others. She frowned. Gently, with careful hands, she unpicked the inner lining along the hem, just enough to see what had been hidden inside. A folded slip of paper, cream-colored, slightly scented. The ink had faded slightly with time or perfume. She unfolded it cautiously, glancing behind her to ensure no one watched. French. She could read some of it, not all, but enough. The words were affectionate, familiar. There were references to future meetings, to a shared secret. The tone was not businesslike. It was personal, intimate, and it was signed with a single initial. I. Anya's chest tightened. There were few women at court whose names began with I. Fewer still who wore gowns of imported silk and had lovers in need of secrecy. The letter was addressed to a foreign nobleman, a name she recognized from the court roster. This letter was not meant for a prince's eyes, nor for any member of the Orense court. With a soft exhale, Anya folded the letter back into its original shape and slipped it into the lining, re-sewing the hem with the same thread. Her hands shook, but she did not let it show. She pulled the final stitch taut, flattened the fabric, and set the gown carefully aside. She would return it discreetly. Leave it in the correct basket. Say nothing. She had nearly turned away when a voice rang out over the laundry chamber. Volkova, Goethe. Anya turned, composing her face. You're to take that silk gown to the royal quarters yourself, Goethe called over the roar of boiling water. Tonight. The gown was heavier than it looked. Draped carefully over Anya's arms, it pulled slightly at her shoulders with each step she climbed, the fine silk brushing against her wrists like chilled water. She ascended the narrow stairwell slowly, careful not to jostle the seams she had just resewn. The passage twisted in tight turns, the stone damp with condensation, the oil lamps flickering overhead. Her pulse tapped quietly against her ribs, unsteady and far too loud in her own ears. She emerged onto the upper level, breath caught somewhere between throat and chest. The corridor before her was hushed and gleaming, lit by tall brass sconces and flanked with pale tapestries. The marble beneath her feet was too polished, too echoing. She was a girl of steam and wet cotton now, not of polished halls or embroidered rugs. Her clogs felt wrong on the floor. No one stopped her. No one looked at her twice. Her apron was clean, her sleeves rolled down, her eyes lowered. She moved with the practiced swiftness of someone who wished not to be noticed, and had long since learned how. At the chamber door, she knocked once, then again. A lady-in-waiting took the gown without comment, too preoccupied with a tray of scented oils to pay Anya any attention. She bowed slightly and turned to go. Her breath returned only when her back was to the door, the corridor stretching out before her like a lifeline. But the tension didn't leave. It clung to her, more persistent than steam. In the days that followed, the routine resumed, yet not entirely. On the second morning, one of the royal valets arrived in the laundry with a request. The prince's dressing garments, he said, were to be sent directly through Anya's hands going forward. It was a matter of consistency and care. His Highness had noted her precision. Goethe raised an eyebrow, but said nothing. She handed Anya the next bundle and returned to her pressing table with a shrug. So it began. At first, there was nothing unusual. Anya carried folded shirts and freshly ironed coats up the same servant stairwell, left them with the valet, and returned. No one addressed her, and she offered no gestures beyond the expected courtesies. But by the third delivery, the prince himself opened the door. He was without his coat, sleeves rolled to the elbow, his cravat undone. He looked tired, perhaps from court, perhaps from the obligations that seemed to mount around him like stacked stone. His eyes found hers again, still blue, still searching. He thanked her quietly and accepted the garments. She dipped her head, turned, and left. But the next time, he asked her a question. She couldn't answer, not aloud. After a pause, she took a small note from her apron and wrote 3 words in neat script. Forgive me, I cannot. His brow furrowed, not in frustration, but in realization. He nodded slowly, then opened the door wider next time and motioned for her to enter. The routine deepened. She brought the garments. He made quiet inquiries. She replied with notes when necessary. They didn't speak, but they spoke. The smallest expressions began to fill the space between them, her soft smile of acknowledgement, the way his gaze lingered a second longer than custom allowed. His fingers brushed hers once as he took a coat, and though she did not flinch, a warmth crept up her neck that she could not chase away. He began to notice things. The even stitching at the collar, the way she folded each cuff just so, the slight scent of starch and something unplaceable, lavender perhaps, that clung faintly to her skin. She noticed, too, the shadows beneath his eyes, the tension that never fully left his shoulders, the careful restraint in every word he spoke in the presence of others. When she handed him a waistcoat with a note attached, "You forgot this yesterday," he had smiled. Not a prince's smile, a man's. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something more than silence, something more than duty. The shift didn't go unnoticed. Duchess Irina, always alert to movements around her, began to observe Victor with increasing scrutiny. Where once he had followed her through state functions with quiet attention, now he seemed distant. At dinners, his eyes wandered. At court meetings, his answers grew clipped. The wedding was fast approaching. Too fast, it seemed, and the prince, rather than becoming more attentive, appeared to be retreating behind a polite mask. The duchess's chambermaid was the first to whisper of the laundress. She had seen her outside the prince's chambers, alone, several times. At first, Irina dismissed it. But when the sightings repeated and the rumors stirred among the footmen and maids, she began to pay attention. She did not confront Victor. That was not her way. Irina preferred calculation to confrontation. Instead, she instructed her maid to watch the laundry rooms and report every delivery, every errand. She noted the dates, the times. She observed when Victor began to excuse himself earlier than usual from their meetings, and she waited. The king, too, noticed the prince's detachment. There was no open rebuke, but a firm conversation took place behind the locked doors of the royal solar. The details of that exchange did not travel through the palace, but the result did. An order was passed to resume preparations without delay. The ceremony would not be postponed. The ball arrived on a Friday evening. It was held in the great hall, where dozens of glittering chandeliers lit the space like 1,000 stars. Music floated beneath the gilded ceilings, and the marble floors glistened beneath satin slippers. Nobles from neighboring territories filled the room, ambassadors, counts, high-born guests with embroidered coats and powdered hair. Duchess Irina was the picture of poise in a gown of sapphire silk, her jewels catching every flicker of candlelight. Anya was far from the revelry. She had no invitation, no place among the dancers. But duty called her to the fringes of it. She was sent to the retiring room with linen wraps and cloths, simple luxuries meant to soothe the flushed faces and bare shoulders of the ladies resting between dances. The order had come late. She wrapped the bundle carefully and made her way through the servants' corridor, keeping to the edges where shadows softened the grandeur. She entered the retiring room just as Duchess Irina arrived, flanked by 2 attendants. Their eyes met across the space. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Irina moved forward, her heels tapping softly on the marble, her expression unreadable. "Well," she said, glancing at the wraps in Anya's arms. "Still climbing, are we?" The ladies behind her tittered. Anya bowed her head, silent. Irina circled her slowly, hands clasped at her waist. "You've taken to delivering quite a lot to the royal family these days. Such devotion. Though I suppose a girl in your position must find clever ways to ascend." The jab was subtle, but sharp. Anya remained still. Irina tilted her head, her voice smooth as velvet. "Do you think because you don't speak, you can't be heard, that your silence shields you?" She stepped closer. "Don't mistake pity for favor. And don't imagine that proximity makes you anything more than what you are." She smiled, just faintly, and turned to her companions. "Some girls are clever with needles, others with their eyes." Anya's face burned, her cheeks stinging with quiet shame. Still, she said nothing. She only bent her head lower, her hands white-knuckled around the linen wraps. Without another word, she turned toward the door. She opened it into the darkened hallway and stopped. Standing directly in front of her, framed in the low candlelight, was Prince Victor. His expression was unreadable. And behind him, the ballroom doors had just begun to open. The air held its breath. Prince Victor stood in the threshold, blocking Anya's escape, the folds of his formal coat unmoving despite the faint gust from the open ballroom doors behind him. Candlelight flickered across the high planes of his face, revealing nothing. No outrage, no surprise. Just stillness. And then, without turning, he said quietly enough for only those closest to hear, "I heard everything." The sound carried farther than he'd intended. One of the Duchess's attendants gasped softly. The murmuring in the retiring room slowed, then surged again like ripples across a still pond. Behind Victor, the music from the ballroom had stopped, the swell of violins dying mid-measure. Voices lifted, footsteps began moving closer. Duchess Irina stepped forward. She held her poise with practiced ease, her chin tilted, her spine impossibly straight. "Your Highness," she said, her voice smooth and brittle, "this is neither the place nor the moment for interruption." Guests spilled into the hallway, drawn by the strange halt in music and the thickening tension. The corridor filled quickly. Court ladies in satin gowns, gentlemen with powdered wigs and trimmed sashes, curious servants hovering at the corners, careful not to cross the invisible lines of station. Victor turned slightly, enough to face the onlookers. He looked at none of them. Only Irina. "Then when would be the moment?" he asked. Irina faltered, just slightly. Her lips twitched, then pressed together. Victor's voice remained calm. His shoulders, however, were set with quiet force. "I am aware of what was said to Miss Volkova, and though I've remained silent out of respect for duty, I will not do so tonight." Irina laughed, too softly. "A laundress?" she asked, her tone laced with polished disbelief. "Is that what you've come to defend, Your Highness?" "No," Victor said. "Not a laundress. A woman." A hush fell. The flicker of reaction spread down the corridor, through the nobles, the footmen, the chambermaids, until even the air itself seemed to pause and listen. "I will not pretend any more," he continued. "I hold affection for her. That is not a scandal. It's a truth. And I will not allow her to be slandered to protect appearances." Irina stared at him, her eyes colder than they had ever been. He didn't flinch. "But if we are to speak of impropriety," he said, "perhaps we should begin with this." From the inside pocket of his coat he drew a folded sheet of parchment, creased, worn, and still faintly perfumed. The court leaned forward as he unfolded it and held it out, not to the crowd, but to Irina. Her face remained unreadable. "This letter was found sewn into the lining of your undergown," Victor said. "The same gown you wore during the engagement procession. It was not written to me, nor was it meant to be read. And yet, here it is." A ripple of confusion and disbelief passed through the corridor. No one moved. Even the flickering sconces seemed to dim. "Irina von Falkenrath," Victor said evenly, "you wrote this letter to Count Vanel of Rensk, a foreign diplomat currently stationed here in Orenza." Someone gasped. "That correspondence, if revealed publicly, could cast doubt upon our alliance, upon your intentions. It would jeopardize the very union you claim to protect." Irina's face paled. She stepped forward slowly, her voice low and sharp. "That letter is a fabrication, planted to shame me." "You recognize it," Victor said. Her eyes flared. "You're being deceived. She found a way into your confidence, and now you doubt your duty for what? A stolen moment? A servant girl's smile? Enough." His voice rang like a blade. The crowd recoiled slightly. In the stillness that followed, Victor turned, not to address the court, but to Anya. She had not moved. Her arms remained wrapped around the linen bundle still clutched to her chest, her gaze lowered. But when he looked to her, her head lifted slightly. Their eyes met. He extended his hand, not a command, but a question. "Miss Volkova," he said gently, "will you come forward?" The silence was complete. Only the distant crackle of candle flames could be heard. Anya's hands trembled. She stepped once, then again, until she stood beside him. Her breath caught behind her ribs, but she nodded, once, and reached into her apron. She pulled out the second note, the one she had copied, the one she had never intended to show. In delicate script, it bore the same language as the letter Victor held. She unfolded it and spoke without words, pressing it to her chest, then pointing to Irina's gown. "She found it," Victor said, interpreting. "In the hem. She re-sewed it, told no one." Irina's voice cracked. "She's lying." "Why would she lie?" Victor asked. "She asked for nothing, no recognition. She tried to return the gown quietly." From the back of the crowd, a voice cut through the murmur. "I saw her." Goethe's heavy figure stepped into view, hands clasped behind her back, her expression fierce and unsparing. "She brought the dress to me, said nothing, but I saw how she looked at it. I thought it was nerves, didn't realize she was protecting you." The older woman nodded once toward Anya. "She asked no favor, said no word, just did her duty. While you," her eyes flicked to Irina, "sent your girl to check our bins after." Gasps echoed against the corridor walls. Then another voice rose, deeper, unfamiliar. "I know the name Volkova." An elderly man stepped from the cluster of foreign dignitaries, his robes marked by the gold trim of the diplomatic corps. His beard was trimmed to a point, his voice thick with a faint Eastern accent. "Count Dmitri Volkova was an honest man," he said. "I knew him. His family was stripped of title when I was but a young attaché. I remember. There was no trial, no proof, just whispers." All eyes turned back to Anya. "She was his daughter?" the man asked softly. Victor nodded. "I thought she was lost," the ambassador murmured. "It was a shame. The old count held no love for court games, but he was loyal. More than I can say for some still wearing their crowns." The words settled heavily. From the upper landing a faint rustling was heard. Every head turned. High above the marble steps, the King of Arenze stood beneath the balcony arch, flanked by guards, a ceremonial robe draped over his shoulders. His face was unreadable, lips pressed thin, eyes unreadable beneath silver brows. He said nothing, but his gaze did not leave his son. Then he lifted a single hand and beckoned Victor forward. Without a word, Victor turned to Anya. He bowed slightly, not as a prince to a servant, but as a man to a woman. Then he followed the guards up the staircase, disappearing into the inner corridor behind the king. No one dared to speak. Behind the closed doors of the royal sola, silence stretched as thick as smoke. King Theodore turned to his son. "You will listen carefully." Victor stood still, shoulders squared. "You have one choice," the king said coldly. "You will marry Duchess Irina and preserve the alliance, or you will renounce the crown and live as a commoner." The fire in the royal solar had burned low, casting long shadows across the walls and softening the king's expression, though not his tone. He did not shout, nor raise his hand, but each word landed like the crack of a gavel. "Marry Irina, or renounce the crown. No room for debate, no window for delay." Victor stood unmoving. The hours that followed were quiet. The corridors of the palace thinned as guests were ushered away under the pretense of an early close to the ball. The scandal that had unfolded before their eyes clung to every wall, every corner of Orenzi's hallowed palace, spreading in whispers through servants' quarters and noble chambers alike. Yet Victor said nothing to anyone as he left the king's presence. Not to the guards, not to Irina, whose chamber door remained closed. Not even to the valet who waited outside his room with clean linens and an unspoken question on his lips. By the time dawn touched the stone battlements with its pale fingers, Victor had made his choice. Anya waited at the edge of the lower hall, where servants rarely dared linger. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, the same way they had been in the corridor where her fate had first changed. She didn't ask what the king had said. She only looked at him, her expression open, terrified, and calm all at once. He didn't speak. He reached for her hand. They left without fanfare, without escort. No footman, no luggage. Just two figures slipping out through the service gate before the sun fully climbed the eastern hills. The guards at the wall exchanged glances but said nothing. Orders had not changed, but no one dared stop the prince who no longer wore his sash. They rode east. Away from the towers of Aurense, away from the court and its grinding machinery of duty and pretense. Victor took them to a small estate nestled beyond the river Elna, a secluded parcel of land that had once belonged to his mother's family. A forgotten manor surrounded by ancient trees and silent hills. It was the sort of place that didn't appear on royal maps anymore. The servants there were few, old and discreet. They asked no questions when the prince arrived unannounced with a quiet woman at his side and no insignia on his shoulders. Anya said little during those first days. She woke before him each morning, moving through the kitchen in bare feet, her sleeves rolled to her elbows as she kneaded bread and brought water in from the well. It wasn't her duty, he hadn't asked, but it brought her calm. In the afternoons she walked the garden paths once wild with overgrowth, now slowly cleared by her hand. She began to smile, shyly at first, then more freely, like the unlearning of a habit. Victor watched her quietly, from the arched doorway or across the kitchen table, never interrupting. In the evenings, he read aloud to her by the fire, not because she asked, but because she listened with such intent that it made every word feel worthwhile. He would glance up from the page to find her eyes fixed on his face, not the book. He asked once, in a moment of stillness, if she ever missed the palace. She wrote only, "No, I never belonged there." He looked at her then, fully, and replied, "Neither did I." Rumors began to fester in the city weeks after their departure. The prince had vanished. The duchess had withdrawn from public life. The wedding had not occurred. Nobles speculated, some in scandal, others in admiration. The king issued no official statement. The palace gates remained closed to inquiry. But while the royal court danced around silence, the people did not. Letters began to arrive. First, from a minor baron in the western district, praising the prince's courage. Then from a widow in the capital, whose son had served under the elder Volkova and remembered his integrity. Then came bundles of parchment from distant towns, signed by merchants, scribes, tailors, seamstresses, all voicing the same truth. The people respected a man who chose honor over politics, and a woman who had risen not by cunning, but by quiet strength. The king read each letter. He said nothing for days. Then, in a gesture that stunned even his advisors, he issued a formal summons, not a warrant. A request. Victor and Anya returned to the palace under an autumn sky, the leaves along the river turning gold and crimson. They arrived not through the servant gate, but through the front, where sentries stood in silent salute. The guards opened the doors without delay. No one stopped her. No one asked for her station. The king met them in the royal audience chamber. He looked older than before, the lines around his mouth deeper, his shoulders slightly stooped beneath the weight of his robes. But his eyes, so sharp in judgment, had softened, if only slightly. "You defied me," he said. "I did," Victor replied. "And you expect forgiveness?" "No, I expect to be heard." The king studied him for a long moment. Then his gaze shifted to Anya. "Miss Volkova," he said. She bowed her head, not out of fear, but out of respect. "I have spoken to the ambassador," the king continued. "He confirmed your father's innocence. It seems many in this court owe him more than they ever admitted." He paused, as if the words tasted bitter on his tongue. "I cannot erase what was done, but I can correct the record." He turned to his steward. "Restore the name Volkova, with all rights and honors afforded to a family of noble standing." Anya looked up, stunned. "And the Duchess?" Victor asked, voice low. returned to her family's estate. Her correspondence was amended. The ambassador has been recalled. The alliance renegotiated without marriage as its cornerstone. The king's gaze held his son's. You left with nothing but your name. You returned with your people's trust. That is not a failure. He stepped down from the dais, walking slowly toward them. If you still intend to make her your wife, he said, quieter now, then you may do so, as my son, and as my heir. Anya did not move. Victor turned to her and held out his hand. This time she didn't hesitate. The gardens of Aurense bloomed under a soft sky the day they were wed. The grounds once forbidden to servants were now open to all. White and rose garlands lined the hedges. The old laundry courtyard had been cleared and dressed in satin-covered tables, where nobles dined beside cooks and washerwomen. Gerta stood near the fountain, arms crossed, eyes misty. Anya wore a gown of cream silk, modest in cut, embroidered with lilies along the hem. Her hair was braided in a crown across her head, unpowdered and unadorned. She walked not behind him, but beside him, step for step. Her gaze was calm, her smile small but real. Victor stood taller than ever, no longer bound by the rigid stiffness of ceremonial armor. He wore a tailored coat of deep blue and a silver sash, the same one his mother had worn on her wedding day. They took their vows beneath an arbor wrapped in fresh ivy, their hands joined, their eyes locked. The court witnessed it, the servants witnessed it, the people witnessed it. And when the steward read her name aloud, Lady Anya Volkova, Princess of Aurense, the crowd erupted in applause, not out of obligation, but belief. There was no rebellion in it, only renewal, a quiet revolution of the heart, and a love that had chosen to be seen. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. What did you think of the story? Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. On a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate this story? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and give it a like to show your support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotions and life lessons. And before we say goodbye, we'd like to remind you that on the end screen, you'll see a recommendation for another exciting and charming story. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.